This is Two J's in a Pod, and the J stands for journalist. I'm Mary Ellen Murphy, and I do a morning show on WGHN Radio.
And I'm Sarah Leach, the executive editor of the Ottawa News Network.
Awesome. Hey, I went a whole week without one story on the Ottawa County Board of Commissioners.
Oh my gosh.
I know.
It's happening. It's finally happening.
A whole week. That doesn't mean that stuff wasn't going on. I just didn't really have anything that was all that pressing.
Yeah, you know.
But I'm sure you have stuff.
Well, so a funny thing is that I called Chair Teeples, John Teeples, a couple of weeks ago to ask him about something. And he said, you know, Sarah, I don't really like talking to you, but I kind of do.
What?
He said that he listens to the podcast.
Oh, boy. Hi. Oh,
Yeah,
and
right?
there are people listening. Yes.
Right.
Hello. Thank you for listening, Board of Commissioners.
And he appreciates the delving into the issues. And I'm getting some feedback from several of the commissioners, which is really, it's kind of, it's very meta, right? That we're talking about them and then they're kind of listening to us talking about them. So it always makes me a little self-conscious, but yeah.
I wouldn't want anyone sitting in a room talking about you and I.
I know. I just try not to think about it.
Oh boy. Oh, you just opened a can of worms here. Cause now I'm like, okay. So he appreciates us delving into it because we can't get it in a 4-minute newscast or, you know, an article in a paper.
Right.
Okay.
Right. Well, and I think that part of the thing that at least the electeds appreciate is that we're not looking at things that are black and white, right? We're saying, well, they could do this or they could do that, or maybe they're thinking about this, and here's where we think that things are going to go because this logically bears out this way. And I think that he appreciates that we are kind of exploring that fully fleshed out conversation to share with the listeners so that they also can see that, you know, things aren't necessarily so simple. They're complex.
They sure
They're strategic.
Are. Yep.
And when you're dealing with people trying to work with other people, it's always complicated.
It is. And I had a really good interview with Vice Chair Josh Bruger. And, you know, look, they're going to be here for another 3.5 years. They have to get along. You can't pick at every little thing because then you become just as bad as a high schooler if you're doing that.
Right.
You know,
and then we're going to have weird meetings.
I don't want any weird stuff.
Right. But
I've had enough of that in my life.
I know that there's some call to potentially go back to the old format of having 2 meetings a month.
Yeah.
I guess if I were to take a straw poll, I kind of see maybe half of the board in favor of this, including all of the Ottawa Impact commissioners and Commissioner Zylstra, who is the Democrat. So there could be a change up. You know, they said they were going to try it. They're trying to condense down into 1 meeting a month in order for, you know, efficiency. So we have long meetings, but just 1 a month versus 2 that potentially could draw out, you know, for mini marathons.
Right. So what updates do you have? Do you have anything on the FOIA case or?
Yeah, the FOIA case, that is, it's such a bizarre case. There are some briefs that were filed in that case. So where we last left our heroes, we had a hearing in front of Judge Baker, who is in Allegan County.
Yes.
And because remember, we can't, well, maybe we can, but all of the Ottawa County judges recuse themselves on Ottawa County cases. So it gets signed out elsewhere. That's why we've got a Grand Rapids judge overseeing one case, an Allegan judge overseeing another. And the last hearing in that case ended kind of abruptly with the judge telling the plaintiff's attorney, Sarah Riley Howard, that she needed to find some case law in order to establish a legal position. And really what Ms. Howard was saying is that the county has not really done its job in terms of tracking down the people that these FOIAs are applicable to, because some of them are no longer in office, and that the county has not performed that effort in good faith. And apparently claims that they can't make contact with certain people, like former Commissioner Roger Belknap, who lives 3 streets over from me, by the way. I mean, I said I could knock on his door and ask him, but apparently we can't find him. And so, you know, Ms. Howard doesn't really accept that. And so she is moving forward with the discovery process, which means that she can ask for text messages, emails. She can depose some of these people. So I didn't anticipate this case getting that complicated.
I didn't either.
I certainly don't think that we're going to get any of the records because, I mean, anything that might have existed is probably long gone. But I just didn't think that it was going to get quite into the weeds like this.
Wow.
So that's interesting. And then the Zimmer case. Now, this is the case where the board was considering accepting a settlement offer at its last full meeting. And we weren't sure what the terms of that settlement proposal were. Well, I now have them. I am working on a story, and I'll break the news here. It's not as scandalous as I'm making it sound. It's early, so I'm trying to drum up some energy.
Do you want some coffee or anything?
I just slammed a sugar-free Red Bull before.
Oh, got it. You're a Red Bull girl. That's right.
I'm just waiting for it to kind of kick in.
Nice.
But so in this case, so Dan Zimmer is the plaintiff. Sarah Howard also represents him.
Yes.
She is the attorney in Ottawa County. And they were challenging the legality of 3 agreements that were approved at a board meeting in December when the OI commissioners were still in the majority.
Got it.
So that was the Crockery Lake thing, which has now been surgically removed from that lawsuit because that has taken a different path. And now we are left with these 2 severance agreements for Ben Whitmer and Jordan Epperson, the former interim county administrator, and his executive aide.
Right.
And so as we're moving forward in this case, I'm learning so much about the law, honestly, and covering all of these different facets of it in these various cases. I feel like I'm like an armchair lawyer sometimes. And there's some requirements in terms of how the legal process bears out. And so in order to get to a certain stage of settlement or mediation, the 2 sides have to at least exchange a couple of offers in good faith prior to a mediator or a judge coming in and trying to negotiate a settlement. So the plaintiff makes a settlement offer, and what those terms were admit that the county needs to admit that it violated the law, the Open Meetings Act specifically, when it approved these 2 agreements, and promises never to do it again. Number 2, they would, in exchange for this, they would drop their demand that the county try to claw the money back if the county just admits that it erred. Then there's legal fees cover Howard's legal fees, which is a little under $20,000 to date, and pay out a nominal $500 fee to the plaintiff as a judgment. And that was not considered at all. Because as you remember, very weirdly, the commissioners did not go into closed session to even talk about it. Right. And so Commissioner Zylstra was very adamant about, well, I have some questions. There's terms that I like in this, and there's terms that I don't like. And we don't know which ones they are, because you have to talk about it in closed session. Otherwise, you could jeopardize your legal standing if you talk about it in open session. So that's why public bodies don't do that. So it gets, like, even though this is a very straightforward thing, I've just laid it out, it's pretty... It seems very, simple, and we can just talk about it. There's all these rules of different processes that kind of overlap and start conflicting with one another. And so by rejecting it, they did not make a counteroffer. So we don't know exactly where this stands. And so now the lawsuit is going to proceed with probably depositions and, discovery, which again, now we're going to be able to go into people's emails and find out what they knew and when. And I don't know if the county necessarily wants this to drag on, as it seems to be doing.
Wow. Have you ever been FOIA'd? You personally?
I can't be FOIA'd because I'm not a public body, and I've never been even as a journalist. Even though what I do is a public information product. I've always worked for private companies, so unless I work for a governmental entity, I can't personally be FOIA'd. But I will tell you that journalists sort of sneak into things. I have personally been cited in multiple lawsuits that the county is involved in currently, like where my stories have been cited as exhibits. In the Kleinians case, which is former Commissioner Chris Kleinians is suing MSU for wrongful termination, and singularly former board chair Joe Moss for allegedly sort of strong-arming MSU into firing him after he got elected to the
Aren't there
board.
emails to back that up?
Not quite.
Okay.
There's no, I'm not aware of an email where Moss said, you've got to fire him.
Got it. I was just curious. Okay.
I don't think that it's quite that, but there's the absence of any kind of proof that MSU told Kleinians that he would be fired if he got elected. So because that's something that they claim in their defense is that, he always knew the consequences of that if he got elected, that he potentially could not continue working for MSU because it's a conflict of interest. And Kleinian says that no one ever told me that. And I got blindsided after I got elected.
Oh, wow. Okay.
So that's sort of the crux of that whole argument. And so I was informed actually just yesterday that through the discovery process of that case, that at least, I don't know if it's MSU's side or if it's the county side, but text messages have been provided to the defense to that are my text messages with Mr. Kleinians because he's the plaintiff in the case. So he has a copy of those messages and I do. And it's really weird when you kind of, just by association, you're just doing your job and that you're like, God, what did I say? 18 months ago when we were writing this story.
Right.
It's a little unsettling. But that's why you don't send text messages to elected officials unless you really want people to read them.
That's true.
So
I have, I'm on a text thread with two journalists, Greg Chandler, who actually works in Zealand now. What's the name of the paper?
Zealand Record, yes.
Thank you.
Yes.
He's the editor-in-chief,
Yep, he
right?
took over for Kurt Vancouvering.
Yeah. I love Greg. And Peg McNichol, who we've mentioned before.
Hey, Peg.
We're on a text thread, and I just said to them the other day, I said, there is a book of our texts of the last year and a half. Just our texts alone. We talk about everything from pop culture to politics to what's going on. I mean, honestly.
Yeah. And you know what? I'm in a group chat with her, a group text thread with her and Rick Martinez, who, former Grand Rapids Press alum.
Okay.
And he, we get real sassy about things. Sometimes it's not even really about politics. It's about what's happening in the world. We're razzing sometimes on different outlets because, they might have made a goof or something.
Yeah. I had one of those this week where I was like, okay, all right, let's switch gears because you are covering the Christopher Schurr trial in Grand Rapids.
Yeah, that's wild.
How has that been? Now, I know you're not in the courtroom, you're in a media room with a bunch of other, people, and you're in listening to it. It's taxing.
Yeah, it is. And I admittedly, I did not know a lot about this case leading up to the trial because when this happened in 22, by 2022, the world had been through a whole lot.
Yeah.
We're on the tail end of COVID. We had the George Floyd, BLM inspired protests, and then this happens, unfortunately.
Yeah.
So I had actually never seen the cell phone video up until Monday.
You're kidding me.
I guess at the time I just thought, I'll just read about how this turns out when it happens, because sometimes you just have to compartmentalize.
You do,
focus on and stay in your lane.
Yeah.
Having no idea that 3 years later I was going to be covering the trial.
And you're covering the trial for
the Detroit News.
Wonderful. Okay.
Right.
Okay.
And so I've seen this video like about 60 times now, and it's I guess in terms of evidence of a grisly event. It's fairly tame, so it's not, there's not a lot of gore. There's, you don't really see a whole lot of yucky stuff. Although I think that there's a certain trauma that like repeatedly seeing and hearing something like that, like a gun going off over and over and over again, it takes its toll on you, even when you're just a fly on the wall. And so I'm trying to think about what the jury would how they're interpreting some of this testimony. But really what the crux of the case is about is that, this is a black motorist who gets pulled over. There's a passenger in the car. The police officer says the plates don't match the registration for the vehicle. So perfectly reasonable, reason to pull him over. However, the motorist, Patrick Leoya, is intoxicated. Now, the officer doesn't necessarily know this at that time. We know that now after an autopsy.
Right.
And so he wasn't really complying with commands. He seemed to be confused about why the officer was pulling him over. The officer thinks that he might run, and so he turns him around and tries to put his hands behind his back. And then there's maybe a 3.5 minute struggle where Leoya kind of breaks away. He runs around the back of his car in between his car and the cruiser. The officer tackles him. Now they're in a wrestling match.
It's hard to watch.
A taser gets pulled out. The taser goes off, and so there's both cartridges have been deployed, and there's probes on the grass, and no one actually gets tased. Now here is where the fundamental difference in the claims are. So the prosecution says that there was no reasonable threat to Officer Schurr's life at that moment. So therefore, he was not justified in using lethal force, because what he did was he took his service weapon off of his right hip. He brought it up to the back of Leoya's head, because at this time he's on his back. They're on the ground. They're struggling, and he puts it to the back of his head and he shoots him. And so then the fight is over. Now that what the defense is saying is that, Leoya had been grappling for the taser, had it in his right hand, although he was laying on top of it, essentially, at this point. So is that a deadly threat when there's no more cartridges left? Because there is the capacity in the taser where the little electrodes at the muzzle of it can create a shock, and you can what's called a drive stun.
Yeah.
I know way too much about taser technology.
You mentioned that
now.
to me the other day. Yeah. You sent me the details on that.
Where you can like jam it into somebody's skin, and it won't like lock up your body like the full taser effect that we see in the movies, or on episodes of Cops or whatever. Right. But it hurts like a son of a gun.
Yeah.
One of the GRPD officers who has testified likened it to a blowtorch. It's like getting a blowtorch to the skin.
No, thank you.
So is that enough of a threat? Because what the prosecution is saying is, okay, but it's not like a gun. So what if he got your taser? Just get off of him and back up. He can't shoot you with a taser. He has to be like literally right here.
Okay.
To jab you with this taser. So, and you still have a gun on you. So you could have backed up and created distance, waited for backup to come, which he had called for. So there's all this kind of shoulda, woulda, coulda, and it's sort of a battle of the experts about like, what would you logically, what would a reasonable person do in your place? And so I honestly have no idea who's being more effective and who's not. I think that this is a complete toss-up at this point.
You think it's going to last another week and a half?
I don't know. The prosecution already rested its case. They only had 11 witnesses.
Okay.
And there was some controversy about the experts, because there were two experts who prepared a report, and it was about the use of force and what is called officer-created jeopardy, where one expert from the University of South Carolina essentially, he reviewed the case. He looked at all of the videos, and he said, there were multiple tactical decisions at different points throughout this incident that sure created additional risk. One of them I thought was really interesting is that when he chose to pursue Leoya after he kind of initially breaks away and sort of runs around the car, Schurr follows him, and then they go past Leoya's vehicle. Now, remember, there's a passenger
there's
in
someone
that,
sitting in that
car
vehicle, right?
That has not been identified, not screened, not cleared.
Right.
You don't know if he's got a weapon.
You don't know anything
if
at
he's
that point.
destroying evidence. He could scooch over and like take the car and drive away.
You don't know.
So this expert is saying, well, that. Honestly, you were good up until that moment, because now you've made a tactical decision that has put you at risk. And then, the choice to deploy the taser when you're so close gave Leoya the opportunity to kind of bat at it and then ultimately grab it. Why didn't you back up? There's a lot of shoulda, woulda, coulda, hindsight arguments about what a reasonable person should do. And I know that it's frustrating sometimes for listeners, because they tend to kind of fall into one category or the other, where, look, the officer's just trying to do his job. These are split-second decisions. And then there's also the other side saying, well, we need to be demanding, better and more out of our police agencies so that these incidents don't happen. I guess I kind of like in the middle. I can recognize that I would not have any kind of reasonable skills in that situation to navigate that any better than what that officer did. However, he has gone through extensive training, and they train all the time. So the standard is higher. It's not like a Joe Schmo, I'm just interacting with somebody on the street and then ultimately we start wrestling and somebody dies. It's a completely different scenario.
Right.
So, I really don't know what I would do if I was on that jury, to be honest with you.
Jeez. I was on a jury in Muskegon 2.5 weeks. And
what was the charge?
Murder.
Oh, wow.
I'm just going to leave it at that. I tried to get out of it.
And you said you were a journalist, right?
Yes, but let me say this. Well, at the time, I wasn't a journalist. I was just an on-air personality.
I still would have said.
Okay, but get that. Okay, and the only because I do not think you should try to get out of jury duty. You should do it.
Yeah,
it's important.
Yeah,
wouldn't you want someone like yourself on a jury if you were in trouble? That's what I always say to people. But I had already committed to filling in for someone that was taking a 2-week vacation overseas.
So you can't control that. I
mean,
yeah.
So I'm like, well, I know lots of people. I know Rachel Ruiz. She was just in the studio the other day. And the lawyer, well, I'm sure a lot of us know Rachel Ruiz. We see her on TV every day, Mary Ellen. But don't you think you could separate the two and,
And you're like, well, yeah.
do your duty and be on this jury?
Because you're not gonna lie.
No, I'm like, I guess so. Oh, jeez.
I got called for jury duty, but it was district court, and I never got the raffle token pulled, and so I just showed up a few times, but they canceled it a lot of times because we were still on the tail end of COVID. But I secretly have always wanted to be on a jury.
I'm sure
because
you have.
I love
I know you love programming.
Law and Order is probably like the OG is my favorite TV show of all time. Like I love Dick Wolf and all of his programs.
Well, I'm not so, and we've talked about this on the last podcast. I'm not someone that can hide her facial features, and I move around a lot. So imagine me in the jury box.
I know.
I'm doodling.
Yeah.
I'm looking around. I'm looking at the clock. I'm paying attention, but I'm surprised they didn't kick me off, but that was over 10 years ago. That was a long, long time ago, but I'll never forget trying to get out of that. All right. I want to know what you think about this. Governor Whitmer meeting with Trump has some people in the party up in arms, which is absolutely ridiculous. And it's mostly women that are having a cow over this. She had been working on suffrage since 2017. People, hello.
And I grew up right around the corner from Selfridge. Yeah. Yeah.
My brothers flew out of Selfridge. Right. So, yeah.
And I can't even tell you how many times, every time that a new administration would come in, and there was always this question about, is Selfridge going to stay open?
Yeah.
And so now we've got, these fancy new fighter jets and whatnot.
What is she supposed to do? Not be there?
Well,
come on, ladies.
Yeah, and this kind of references last week's conversation where it hey, she's the governor of a state.
Yeah.
She doesn't, you can't do an end run around the president of the United States just because you might not like him or he's not in your party. I mean, we all have to be grown-ups to a certain extent. And I think that's what frustrates me about this hyper-partisan two-party system. I understand a lot of the arguments that one side or the other makes on a singular policy issue. But when you're quote unquote caught talking to the other side, you're just like the scarlet letter.
It's ridiculous.
And I just don't understand that part of it at all. Because if we don't figure out any kind of way of working together, it's not necessarily a cop-out. We don't necessarily have to see it in those terms. It sort of depends on what it is that you're conceding, but I just don't think that, blanket, like you're not one of us and this tribal politic is just, it's very toxic.
It is. And Democrats wonder why the party's such a mess. Well, geez, if when you're trashing other Democrats, that might be a problem. I was just disgusted with what I saw. I felt like I was in high school. I really did.
Yeah.
It just felt like, I was in high school. Do you have any graduation parties to go to this year?
No, I don't think so.
Whoopsie daisy.
Mary Ellen's throwing stuff.
I don't. The year that your own kid graduates, though, boy, you put some money aside because you're going to get invited to every single graduation party. Just a heads up, maybe ask that senior what their plans are. Maybe not where are you going to school? Not everybody goes to college. Some people go and they have a gap year. Some people can't afford to go to school. Some people go to trade school. Some people just go right to the workforce. So maybe say, what are your plans?
Yeah, I'm looking at my 3 kids and they are so different. And I can see where one of them might not necessarily be on the college trajectory. That's just my path. And I'm trying to kind of reconcile that now because he probably is going to go to a trade school. I can definitely see that. And there's no shame in that kind of thing.
No.
I mean, he is almost 14, so there's some time for that to kind of bear itself out. But I think that we need to give some space to people to not, just fit into these neat little boxes.
I'm so, they started
especially so young.
Yeah, they started talking about college when my kids were in 6th grade. It's, you know what? I'm sorry. And these parents that take their kids all over the country on these college visits when they're in 9th, 10th grade. Come on.
I know.
Is it
I'd
you
like
that
to know who these people
is
are.
it you that really wants to go to that school?
Right.
It's probably you that wants to go to that school, not your kid. And you didn't get in, and you're hoping that they will, and then you're going to live vicariously through them.
I know. I don't understand that kind of parenting style.
I
kind of look at, and maybe this is naive because my kids are still kind of young, but I look at it like I'm excited to see what they're going to do and be.
Yes.
And I am just kind of,
What kind of human being will they be?
Right. I'm looking forward to what wonder and and excitement that they're going to get into. And so I don't have any preconceived notions of what that necessarily is.
Because yesterday I talked to both of my daughters on the same day, and I thought, oh, that never happens. I had like these half-hour conversations with them just about everything, and I thought, wow, they're 26. They're really mature. This is really, really nice to just have these conversations about life and not necessarily needing anything, but it was really, really nice. And I thought, wow, we've come so far from senior year when they were arguing, they shared a car.
Yeah.
Oh, that's fun. When they have to share a car, oh, you'll be dealing with that.
I actually had to do that.
Did you?
He was my then boyfriend and then became my husband. We shared a car for a year.
Oh.
Yeah. And it was in 2009, during the after the housing bubble burst, and we had moved to Virginia and we stayed there for a year. And I will tell you that when you're under very unique, high pressure situations like that, it actually was okay. It was more like after things started loosening up and we were able to afford another car, it almost is like you're in a crisis moment and you make it work. But then when you don't have to make it work, then it starts to get complicated again. I find that fascinating that we do what we have to do in the moment, but why can't we do that all the time? Why do we have to be in those high pressure situations to make those things work?
That's true. I'm ready for summer. I'm telling you. You'll see me a lot at the beach and swimming and
you will not see me at the beach. I burst into flames.
I do too, but I'm just ready. I'm just ready for summer. Now the kids have how many weeks of school left? About 5?
6, 5 or 6.
Okay, 5 or 6 weeks of school left.
My middle one took a tour of White Pines, so that's the intermediate school.
Oh wow!
We're signing up 8th grade classes for my oldest. And obviously, Mary A. White is closing, so there's going to be a tour of the elementary schools that the affected kids there. That my youngest is going to go to Rosie Mount, so we got a confirmation letter.
Okay.
So a lot of transitionary plans going on.
I'm telling you. Do you still have people working on stories like in Spring Lake and City of Grand Haven and things like that as well with Ottawa News Network?
Yeah, and we're trying to expand. Fundraising is hard.
I know. We need to talk about that. Yeah,
I know. We're trying to raise enough money where we're not only able to sustain what we currently have in year 2, but also to hire more staff. If not a full-time reporter, then at least a couple more freelancers so that we can expand coverage.
And so how does an organization like Ottawa News Network raise money?
Well, through donor appeals. So we use our social media channels. We use our subscriber list on the website to, kind of make these direct appeals. But then, events, we have a fundraising committee where they're strategically applying for grants.
Wonderful. Awesome.
We're kind of throwing all the spaghetti noodles at the wall, which you essentially have to do. And maybe 1 or 2 will work out.
Yeah.
And then, you take the W and then you look for the next one.
There you go.
And it's every year you're always in fundraising mode in a nonprofit.
Isn't that something? And you had just posted a couple of days ago that you had just, it was your
My fired-versary.
fired-versary. I love that because I think that it was a very freeing thing for you.
Yeah.
I know it was horrible when it all went down, but
I was terrified on that day, but I've said this in previous interviews, but I got fired, I think it was like 10 or 11 in the morning on a Monday.
Mm-hmm.
And half an hour after that, I got a call from the school and my middle child was not feeling good. I think she had a low-grade fever and I had to go and get her.
Yeah.
And so the way that I have framed it is I did not have enough time to have the breakdown that I probably was entitled to.
Right.
And I cried in the car.
Yeah.
Cleaned myself up and got my kid. And then I went back to work and I made a series of phone calls and I lined up freelance. And within 3 days I was back working and getting, some income coming in. And so I think that because again, you're in that crisis and you're in survival mode and you just got to do what you got to do.
Yeah.
And then talking about it was the next step because I've never really been in a position where I could be open about my career.
Exactly.
Who I work for.
Right.
It's always like this veil of secrecy.
Yeah.
Behind this media wall.
Well, especially with a print person.
Right.
Because they're not hearing your voice and they're not seeing you.
Right. And
it's your word. They're reading your words.
Almost all of the private companies are very, very, they're very controlling about branding. They're very controlling about, what you're allowed to say. You need to clear it with corporate communications before you serve on some panel at the old folks' home.
Yep. No, I get it. You got to talk to the format captain.
Are we ever allowed to talk? I mean, the irony of the fact that we're the free speech people and we don't have free speech.
I know.
Is just
it's something, isn't it?
It's just stunning to me. So going on that offensive and trying to tell my own story and control my own narrative was terrifying, but I'm so glad that I did it because it really ended up working out for me.
Oh, it did. It did. And you came on our show on Good Morning Grand Haven, and we certainly appreciated it.
Yeah.
I see Dirk Waringa, our producer, is going to be flying through the doors any minute now. I don't know if he's going to say anything, but he did mention that when he's out with his coffee crew or if he's talking about the podcast, people will overhear and they'll say, "Oh, I've heard about Two J's in a Pod. That's a great podcast." So hello to everybody listening. We say thank you for listening, right?
Yes, absolutely. Hi, Dirk.
Hi, Dirk. How you doing?
I'm still alive.
You're still alive. I'm alive too, and I'm feeling good.